Shopping is hard, right? But there's a better way. Stitch Fix online personal styling makes it easy. I just give my stylist my size, style, and budget preferences. I order boxes when I want and how I want. No subscription required. And she sends just for me pieces. Plus outfit recommendations and styling tips. I keep what I love and send back the rest. It's so easy. Personal styling for everyone. Get started today at stitchfix.com/Spotify. That's stitchfix.com/Spotify.
We off? 30 seconds of carefree bliss.
Oof, like wind in your hair carefree.
Oh, like using Clorox disinfecting all-purpose cleaner in the home carefree.
Yes.
Like Doc slobbing on the coffee table and cleaning it with Clorox carefree.
He's on a roll now.
Spit toothpaste on the faucet.
You got it. You got it.
Peanut butter on the light switch.
Oh, spritz, spritz.
Spritz, spritz. Clorox, man. Clean feels good.
Okay, we're back.
Use as directed.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Nerding Out on Neurodiversity, the podcast for all things neurodivergence. I'm Dr. Matt Zakreski, clinical psychologist and professional speaker, and I'm happy to be your host through the wild trails of the neurodivergent world.
And I'm Jake Noonan, educational coach and humanities teacher, your co-host and producer, and I'm thrilled to help share the stories and the experiences of wonderful people in the world of neurodiversity.
We're really excited for today's guest, which we are going to say a lot because we're always really excited about every guest we get. So let's get into it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Nerding Out on Neurodiversity. I am so excited for today's episode. As always, I'm Dr. Matt Zakreski, your host, clinical psychologist, professional speaker, neurodivergence advocate, wearer of many hats, and with my co-pilot, as always, Mr. Jake Noonan. Say hi, Jake.
Hi, everybody. Super excited for another episode. And just like Dr. Matt, I am incredibly ecstatic for our guest today.
I mean, we get to talk to really cool people.
Like all the time, which is amazing.
It's almost like we created a podcast to give us an excuse to talk to really cool people.
What?
Shh, don't tell anyone.
It's because you guys are cool people and, right, we're just drawn to each other.
You know, the beacons are lit. Gondor calls for aid. Oh, I've been just showed all my nerdiness right there. Like really just cannonballed into that. So let me please introduce our guest today, Dr. Gilly Kahn. Gilly, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk with you guys today.
Oh, this is such a treat for us. So you and I got to interact through S.J. Childs and her fabulous podcast world. But I don't know how many of our listeners know what you do. So you mind giving them like a quick overview of what you do and how you got there?
Yeah, so I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia. And my work focuses on neurodiversity and emotion regulation, especially in teens. But I see people throughout the lifespan. Like I see little kids and adults as well. So that's my niche. That's the clinical work. I'm also a mom. I have two little kids, 6 and 3, who I love so, so much. And I'm also a writer. So I'm working on my debut novel, which will likely be available in stores in 2026. Right now it's out of my hands. It's with the publisher. So yeah, so we'll see. But when you go the traditional publishing route, it takes time. But I know it's going to be really good. We're putting a lot of time and thought into it. So I'm really excited. And writing is not even my second passion. They're both equal. Like I love creative writing and I love psychology and always been that way. So I'm in my happy place of life right now.
That's awesome. And I didn't know it was a novel. I thought it was more of like the book I just wrote, like sort of like a self-helpy sort of, it makes me even more excited to read it.
Yeah, dude, it's like 255 pages right now, like in a Word document. Yeah, it's pretty legit. It's piece of book, خطيخات book, like a book.
You're going to have so many pre-orders right now. And I just, people are going to listen to this and be like, and add to cart and add to cart.
Yeah, it's not available yet, but follow me on Instagram at drgillykahn.com. Sorry, this is not supposed to be. I am not advertising my book. I was just talking about my passion. But if you're interested in ADHD, especially the emotional part of ADHD, and especially in females, then check me out.
Hi everyone, Jake here, stopping in from the future real quick just to interrupt and say, since we recorded this episode, actually, Dr. Gilly Kahn has put her book, Allow Me to Interrupt, available for pre-order. It launches September 9th. We're so happy for Dr. Kahn and her work, and you can find a link to the pre-order in the show notes. Let's get back to it.
Well, and I don't know, Jake, I think I can speak for both of us here where you bring an awesome guest on. They're obviously going to talk about the things they do. Like, this isn't like one of those freemium games where it's like, if you'd like to listen to the rest of the podcast, please buy Dr. Kahn's book.
Right.
You have to unlock the code. No, I mean.
Yeah, exactly. Like video games.
Oh my gosh, right? It's.
That's in my book. I talk about that.
Stop. Oh.
Yes.
No, 2026 can't get here fast enough. And not just because of the Olympics. So you've got a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old. I've got a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. How much does being a parent impact the work you do?
That's a good question. It impacts my clinical work more because this is how I feel. I think as a psychologist or just a professional in any setting where you work with people, you can try to understand what other people experience or what their day-to-day life is like, but unless you've been there, like, you just don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I remember when I was young, and this was part of how they trained us actually to be psychologists. I looked really, really young, like a kid basically when I was in training. And so they were just like, it was funny, actually, they used to pick on me. Especially Gilly. And so they used to say, like, if you're asked, hey, do you have any kids? Which is kind of ironic because I had kids pretty early. But so if parents ask, do you have any kids? How do you respond to that? Because what they're really trying to get at is, do you have the knowledge and experience to really help my child and to really help us as a family? Because if you're young and you haven't been there, like, you think you get it, but I'm telling you, I've been there and you don't. Like, you don't get it. So I completely understand why that was an issue that was brought up in training and why that was a question that was so commonly asked by parents. And we would always feel nervous, when we were asked, they're testing us, but they should, they care about their kid and, they need good services, but also what do they expect if they're seeing a student? But yeah, I think it does inform my practice. It really helps me. I think I used to feel really nervous around parents when I didn't have kids because I felt less competent. Now that I have kids, I relate to their stories, and I think I can side more with the parent than the child. When you don't have kids and you're only working with kids, you're sort of the child's advocate. But now that I'm working with kids, I see it as working with the family. Like, I really care about the parents too. I'm not their therapist, but I understand their perspective and I want to make therapy work for both of them. It takes two to tango. So it's about giving the parents peace of mind while also giving the kids skills. I
remember very much answering those questions myself in my own training. And, in like some of the more psychodynamic people like explore, why does that matter to them? But like, I think I'm more like you. I'm like, well, of course they want to know. Why would they not want to know? Right. They deserve to know. Yeah. Yeah. But also, what do they expect? If they're going to a university, they're going to see someone young. Like, okay, it goes both ways. But I understand the question. And I actually just submitted, well, I actually didn't just submit, but I wrote an article for Attitude Mag about ADHD and culture. And I think the same concept applies to cultural differences because, in universities, when we're taught about different cultures, it's just like this cookie cutter concept, sort of like a stereotype. I mean, I don't want to hear that, but like, let's learn about like Asian culture, and this is respectful and this is disrespectful. And I think although that's important, to include in a curriculum, I think what's even more important is teaching the skills of like what to ask and how to handle being in a therapeutic relationship that includes someone from a different cultural background.
Like, don't assume that you know. It has to come from a side of like open curiosity and non-judgmentalness, you know? And that's true also, I think, when parenting.
I mean, I say all the time, you got to be curious, not furious, right? And that's if there's a stance you can hang out in to do this work, it's a great place to be. But I mean, just this idea, right, of just Asian culture, right? I mean,
Right? What is that?
right?
Yeah.
Like I can think of 20 different countries in Asia, and it helps that I'm looking at a map of Asia that's right behind my computer. I put little push pins in it for places I travel for work. So the people out there in the universe, I don't have any push pins in Asia yet, just saying. But like a Vietnamese person and a Nepalese person and a Mongolian person are going to have three wildly different cultures because there's cultures within those cultures as well. And we do this thing in the United States where we say Asia or Africa, right? It's like,
Yeah.
oh, like, hold on a second, right?
Because there's only so much you can learn, like I understand that. And it was always hard for me to remember, to be honest, because there's so many different nuances and again, like subcultures. And I didn't retain a lot of the information. What I do in therapy is more of what I said before. Like, if I don't know about the culture, I just ask and I tell them, like, treat me like an alien who has never come across someone like you before. And I'd be happy to tell you about my culture too. But like, I'm just like, tell me about it.
I work with a lot of people who are in the LGBTQ population. When I'm working with a kid who's trans or gender non-binary, I'm cisgender heterosexual. I'm like, listen, I don't know your experience. I don't need you to like drag me through this, but if you can help me level set, then I know where I'm at with you so that I can take the next steps from there. It's that collaborative work, right? That I would not presume just like, yes, all gender non-binary people are X. That's how we, walk into bear traps as the people who, when we're client facing, right? It's like, oh, that's not going to help me out at all. I really need to know who this person is and their unique set of circumstances.
Yes, exactly. Uh-huh.
So when I was reading your work, one of the big buttons for me in the ADHD world is growing up with an ADHD. They only ever really talked to me about the executive dysfunction, organization stuff. I never feel like anyone ever talked to me about the emotionality that comes with being ADHD, right? When I read my first article on rejection sensitivity dysphoria, I burst into tears. And I kid you not, I was like, it's me. So, what brought you to that, and help our listeners understand like what makes the emotional experience of ADHD so different?
Matt, what you said before, I just need to point that out. You said when you learned about RSD for the first time, you burst into tears. So the intro of my book I requested through my Instagram for women to give me descriptions of their experiences with ADHD and emotion dysregulation. And verbatim, one of them said what you said. When I learned about RSD, I burst into tears. It was like just like that. Yeah, I think it's just like I think there's something really powerful about having a name for what you're experiencing and understanding what you're experiencing. And I see that a lot with teens because I specialize in work with teens. They just want to know. They want information, like they want to know why they do what they do. And then why are my recommendations applicable? Even like the physiological explanations, like when I explain to them what different brain structures do and how those play a role in their specific conditions, like they're very interested. I think people underestimate like the capabilities of young people. Yeah, psychoeducation can take you a long way, which brings me to the emotion regulation part of ADHD. So for me too, I mean, now we're a little bit we're not old, but of an older generation. So our education, was different than what's happening in this moment in schools. But if I were to guess, I would say it's not so different because DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, it has the same criteria right now for ADHD, even with text revision that came out more recently. So the criteria focus more on inattentive symptoms, which people with ADHD hate, hate that word because it's not inattentive. Like I also can't stand when people say, oh, women or girls, they're just space cadets. Like, I am not a space cadet. I'm going to take, like the spacesuit and throw it at your face. Like, I am not a space cadet, I am overly attuned. It's just like too much information coming in. And that's actually what neuroscience studies show, that people with ADHD, their brains are actually overactive, not underactive. There's too much connection and neural communication between different brain areas, which is what really drives us nuts. So there's the inattention piece of ADHD, and then there's the hyperactivity, impulsivity, and the criteria have been the same for many, many, many years, or about the same. There have been like little tweaks with the age at which like the symptoms must have been present before age, blah, blah, blah. So, and we can talk about how that's an issue too for girls, or present in more than one setting. That's a newer one. They have evolved a little bit over time, but overall, they're very similar to how they originally were when ADD, attention deficit disorder, first came out. There's no mention of emotion dysregulation. I think maybe in the DSM, the most recent, like the revised version, the DSM-5, there's like a sentence. It's not in the criteria yet, but they mentioned it. Like they put like a little paragraph or sentence. I'd have to pull it up, but it's not part of the criteria and people still don't know about it. And I know that people don't know about it because I practice and I specialize in this work. And so I do a lot of consultations with psychiatrists, with people who do testing for ADHD, and they don't know about it. So if I refer someone because I think they struggle with emotion dysregulation and that falls under the umbrella of ADHD, a lot of times they'll disagree because they'll say that, the teachers don't think this kid has ADHD, so they must not have it because ADHD needs to be present in more than one setting, which I also dislike about the criteria. Because if we think about sex differences, for example, girls are better able to control their behaviors than boys, but girls also have bigger emotions than boys. So girls at school are not going to look like they're, for the most part, impulsive or disruptive. If anything, that would be frowned upon when you think about social expectations. So if a teacher doesn't see it, that means she doesn't have ADHD. That's absurd to me. When you think about just like the science, like brain differences, sex differences, and also just the fact that the criteria right now are developed on and for mostly boys. It was a very large, sample consisting of boys, mostly boys. And that has been an ongoing issue that specialists focusing on ADHD and females have been really trying to advocate for, even as early as 2015, when Ellen Littman and Kathleen Nadeau published the book, Understanding Girls with ADHD. So that was a long time ago, 10 years. And even at that point, they were saying the same things that we're saying today.
One of the things I often like to joke about is that I'm the poster boy for these things because I'm an upper middle class white male. Like, so when they see a gifted kid, subconsciously expect somebody like me, right? And a lot of that stuff was normed after upper middle class white boys, right? Like, I am absolutely part of the problem, and this is why we've created this platform to talk about, like, we have to have the conversations about how things like ADHD look differently in different settings, different cultures, different genders, right? Because it's just the messages that little girls get. I mean, my oldest is 6. Just the messages she get overtly and covertly in the school absolutely impact her behavior, which thus would then impact the ability
the ability to observe. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, boys are allowed to move their bodies more, right? Did you see that study? This was Steve Pfeiffer's team at FSU. They saw that boys were allowed to move their bodies over an hour more a day in kindergarten than girls were.
Meaning like they were given more opportunity to do it, or?
They were given more opportunity and they were less redirected when they were moving their bodies, right? So girls
Right.
with their bodies, hey, stop that young lady.
Right.
Boys were moving them. It was like, boys will be boys.
Yeah, I believe that.
I didn't think we would be talking about that today, but that's super neat. Jake, you look like you're chomping at the bit over there, buddy. Do you want to jump in and ask a question?
I've got like little tiny tendrils of probably 50 different questions and a bunch of different topics too. While you were both talking about a lot of them, I was thinking about my own like emotional youth in a sense and thinking about how I was that perfect behaved child in elementary school, but then at home, my mom has plenty of stories of me like throwing fits in my room and destroying it or tearing down mirrors completely accidentally, but huge emotional outbursts and just the nature of that and like the difference between that and then how I was at school, not being diagnosed until like late 20s. And then thinking back on how everything for education for me personally would have been a little bit different if it was diagnosed earlier. I know that wasn't really my question yet, but but that's just where my mind was taking things for while you're both talking.
No, you're right. I think it's something that a lot of adults, when they get diagnosed with ADHD, that they really struggle with. Like they'll think back and they're sad and also angry because they feel like they've been shafted. Like why is it that a professional is only finding this out now? And I think the real problem is that, well, first of all, most people go to the pediatrician or the primary care doctor first, and they're just not trained in this. So they might give them the wrong answer. But beyond that, I think even within like mental health professionals, if you go to a therapist, they might say like, oh yeah, like I specialize in, or like I see people with ADHD all the time. But like there's a difference between like reading all the literature and having that as a niche, constantly working with that group, because unless you do that, you can say, oh, I do that too. Generalists know a lot of nothing, like
Mm-hmm.
it's like they know a little bit in each area, but to speak, I think, in an educated way about an issue, you really need to specialize in it and devote a lot of your time to that. And it's impossible to specialize in everything. So that's a big reason I think a lot of people fly under the radar too. It's just that a lot of people are generalists or they struggle with finding a specialist. It's the same thing with OCD.
When I moved up here to northern New Jersey, I really reached out to a lot of pediatricians' offices and said, like, hey, like I'm a child psychologist, ADHD and other neurodivergences are my thing. Like, let me be a resource for you. Like, you don't need to send every kid this way, but let me like tell you about some stuff to look at. So you're not reading the DSM, which is really not one size fits all, if it's even accurate in the first place, which is probably a whole separate podcast episode. And some of them were really like open. This is awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Matt. I'm here for it. But the amount of gatekeeping I experienced was shocking to me. Like I am also a doctor, right? But
Right. Like, who are you to tell me? Yeah.
I said to one guy, I was like, listen, I wouldn't come in here and do a blood draw. I don't know how to do that. I actually do, but that's a separate thing. I was an EMT for a minute. But like, I don't expect you to know how to properly assess an 8-year-old kid in a weird environment for ADHD. You can start the conversation. Let me help you do this part of your practice more. And it was, like, don't let the door hit you on the way out, boss. I'm like, fine. You know, it amazes me to no end the places where mental health and medical health butt heads. The things that impact our brains impact our entire bodies.
Right.
We know, the higher rates of substance abuse in ADHDers. We know that the rates of obesity and disordered eating can be higher. I mean, like, those are medical interventions. Well, I don't know where the ball got dropped, but it definitely has been dropped at this point.
Yeah. Actually wrote about that too. Sorry, I keep saying that. But yeah, I mean, one thing I included in relation to this is I listened to a podcast episode about consciousness, and the guy who was talking said something pretty interesting. He said, well, we know that it's hard unfortunately, for healthcare professionals to communicate with each other and to coordinate care reliably. For whatever reason, they just don't do it. very well. So I think, I don't remember what his expertise was, but he was saying that because you can only know so much as a person, he's been using AI to draw on information from other fields. And personally, I don't know how to do it, but it's not a bad idea. I think it's actually very interesting, and there's probably time. There's time before people kind of catch on to that, but just to get kind of a, basic understanding of full picture of something that you're trying to understand, I think turning to AI might be the best solution because egos and prejudices and all of our human limitations don't get in the way there.
That's also really interesting to me because thinking about things with like the pandemic and people being diagnosed, there was like that shortage on like Adderall, Vyvanse, and I'm actually curious both of your perspectives on the aspect of overdiagnosing, especially talking about how like some doctors, some physicians, some pediatricians, psychiatrists, psychologists, like they don't know as much about it because it's so specialized.
You want to answer that, Matt?
Yeah. I was like, I mean, you're the guest, right? Jake gets to me during the week anyway. So why don't you take the lead and I'll chime in if there's things to chime in on.
Okay, I think this is a hard question to answer, but I don't think COVID is what caused the rise in ADHD diagnoses. I think it's more just awareness, and the environment probably had something to do with, increasing people's awareness to potential ADHD also. Like if you think about it, you stick someone with ADHD in a house with nothing to do, they're gonna go bananas. But if they're busy all the time and they're an adult, then maybe they don't know any better, or they don't realize like it is a struggle for them, even if it is more mild. But yeah, I don't think it's the pandemic. There was one study that Dr. Russ Barkley talked about on his YouTube channel to answer this question, and I'll get to the limitation of it after. But basically, it was a study that tested that hypothesis that COVID produced the rise in ADHD diagnoses. And it found that COVID had nothing to do with it. Like it used the statistical method that basically looked at, based on the rate of increase that existed before the pandemic, are we like shooting up? Is it so different from what the rate was before, or would this rate be the same had the pandemic not happened? That's my understanding of what the statistical method did. And they found that there was no difference between if you extracted the pandemic, it would be the same phenomenon. So basically he said, well, so this suggests that unlike what the popular media is saying and whatever, like maybe, COVID is not what caused. And that's what he thinks. I agree with him. Problem though, is that that study was conducted in Israel.
Ah,
And I'm Israeli, so I actually commented on that video because I was like, look, you take like a group of Israelis and you quarantine them like big whoop. They're doing that all the freaking time in bomb shelters. They're like every few years there's a big war and they have bigger things to worry about. So COVID-19 was big whoop. Like I think they're probably going to be less affected by that kind of thing. But I still think it's an interesting study and perspective, to consider.
That read like a cliffhanger, like at the season finale. Like you just hit us with the twist at the end. I was like, one more reason to read your book. I mean, you are such a good storyteller. Like you just described a fairly dry clinical study, and I love Russ Barkley, but like, his work is, let's use the word pedantic. But you're like, and then this thing. I'm like,
he is not pedantic. If you're not already subscribed to his channel, he's adorable. You have to listen. He tells dad jokes in the beginning. Yes, he's so cute. I'm sorry if that's insulting. He's such an expert, and I really look up to him, but he's also very cute.
I mean, I saw him at a conference once and he was surrounded by like what I could best describe as a flotilla of grad students. I mean, it was like watching Obama enter somewhere, like just like a phalanx of humans around him. I was like,
Yeah.
man,
Yeah.
you're really cool. That's so neat. Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. I think that the thing that the COVID pandemic really did, it's like the old joke about Pluto, right? Pluto was discovered in 1936, but we're pretty sure it was there the whole time. We know that the rates of ADHD are fairly consistent, but what we saw is finally more people had more eyes on kids in a way that was like, oh, we're getting meaningful data around this.
Right.
I mean, as a late, not late as you, Jake, but as a relatively late diagnosed ADHDer, school always gave me a place to hide. I could stare out the window. I could doodle on my desk. There's 23 other kids in the room, so you can sort of blend if you need to. But if you're one or two or three siblings and your parents are there trying to make sure you do your online learning, there's nowhere to hide. And all of those executive dysfunctions, I think, stand out a lot more. And then we're realizing, like, oh, wow, this is a thing that's really impacting this kid. Because when we ripped away the scaffolding support that school provides a kid, they had to stand on their own 2 feet. And we realized how few kids were able to do that and how many of those differences can be chalked up to neurodivergence.
Exactly. Yep. You were a window kid. I was a window kid. I was always the one who looked to sit next to the window
Always.
up until high school.
I was a window kid, and my sort of de facto 504 plan is that I was allowed to doodle on any piece of paper that wasn't bolted down.
Oh my God. Lucky you.
Oh my gosh, right? And every so often you get a substitute teacher who'd be like, this young man's not paying attention. And I was in there doodling cartoon characters. He'd be like, Mr. Zakreski, what is the capital of South Carolina, without looking up Columbia? And I would just keep doing like, because I knew it, right? I didn't need to listen to the professor.
Wah, 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 wah,
Yeah,
wah.
right. You are saying things I already know. You keep using this word. I do not think you know what it means. And it was so infuriating. But then, I mean, and this wings back to the idea of anger. Like, I would get so angry. And the first time I told an adult about it, they were like, well, it's puberty. I'm like, well, that explains a lot of things, right? I'm much sweatier than I was before. My knees hurt all the time. Like, puberty is changing some things, right? But I don't know. I think that it's weird to me how angry I am. And I'm not, like, Jake, you've known me for almost a decade at this point. Would you describe me as an angry person?
Not at all. Not even close.
And there are times where it's like that rage monster pokes its head out, and I'm like, I don't want you here. It feels to me like being able to anchor that to the broader experience of ADHD helps me understand myself better. I just wish I had known it sooner.
Yeah, I think it destigmatizes it too, because kids are often given like tacked on diagnoses whenever there's emotion dysregulation in the mix, like DMDD. I wrote an attitude article about that. Disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, for those who don't know, it's a relatively new diagnosis. I mean, 2015, it came out or was it 2015 or 2013? 2013, in the DSM. It was basically included under mood disorders, like depressive disorder diagnosis, but it's more about like explosive outbursts. And the key, though, is that for someone to be diagnosed with DMDD, you need to have irritable mood in between the episodes. So like generally you're like in a pissy mood and then you lose it, like I don't know if it's like 3 times a week, but it's frequent. And with ADHD, that's not the case. It's not like we are angry all the time. Like we're so not, it's just like a quick flick of the switch. And usually there's some kind of trigger. It's not just like out of nowhere. And there's extremes on both ends. I remember before I really learned about this part of ADHD, I was spending a lot of time in my head trying to figure out, like, because I spent a lot of time in my head anyway, but because I was trying to figure out, like, what the hell is wrong with me? And actually, someone said that also in my book. Sorry, here is my ADHD kicking in. And one thing I was thinking was like, okay, like I think a lot, but I don't really think I have GAD. But for a while, I was like, I have GAD because I just couldn't put a name on it because my head was busy all the time, but that's not really part of the criteria. So that was one. And two, it's like sometimes I got so excited about something that would get me in trouble socially. Like best examples are, in grad school, I would get, oh, this is a funny one. Okay, so it's funny now, but it was not funny at the time. So I was a first year grad student in my clinical psych program. And I had just come out of a master's program in experimental psychology, and my niche was developmental psych. So, whew, and I was like a TA for like child development classes, but I loved it. Every time I went, I learned something. I loved my supervisor. I'm still in touch with him. So when we had the option, I had the option to opt out of taking a child development class in my clinical psych program after already, doing that, or to take the class. And I was like, oh, I love this topic. And so I signed up for it, even though I didn't have to take it again. But then, and I see this a lot with neurodivergent kids, because I already knew everything about it, I came off as a major jerk because the teacher made a comment and I knew that it was wrong because there were articles that kind of disproved, what she was saying. I would raise my hand and I would say, that's really interesting. I have heard of these other articles that say this completely other thing. And they would get so mad. And I work with kids now on the same thing, but I used to it would come from a place of not wanting to be snobby. It was coming from a place of wanting to teach others and from being really excited about the subject. And so that's one example of emotion dysregulation gone wrong, where I think it's misjudged in females. There's a part of my book where I talk about the taming of the shrew. That's the Shakespearean play where the main character basically needs to be like molded to become like a fair lady. So that way a man will want to marry her. If you think about 10 Things I Hate About You, that movie is based on the play. Yeah. So females are seen as like rude or like, a know-it-all or like a shrew, for I think for speaking up like that or for sounding like confident like that. And, we end up being chastised for it. And we're really not coming from a place of wanting to hurt anyone. That's the last thing we want. If anything, the female brain is wired to want to be accepted. I think it's just the failure, the enactment failure. It's like we know what's right and then we do it and we're like,
we've got our bumper sticker for this episode. And they want to do it. And then there was like a Hamilton moment, like,
and then we think about it over and over and over again, ruminate. Yeah.
A never-ending cycle.
Yeah. So it's both ends, right? So it's like we can get really excited and then it comes out that way, or we can get really sad, like rejection sensitivity, and it comes out that way, or we can get very angry. It's not like we are always throwing tables. Like I don't throw tables. Anything, like I just participated in a study about RSD. And one of the questions was like, do you get like very, very angry? And I was like, no. I mean, the thing is that I do, but it doesn't like come out really from the get-go. I hold it in and I'm dying inside, but I'm holding it in. And if someone presses me enough, then it will come out. For the most part, it's like the way I work, and I think this is the way most women with ADHD work, is like they're trying so hard to keep it together. And in the right environment, they can, but that doesn't mean that they're not suffering.
Yeah. I mean, I always say this, the appearance of calm does not mean someone is calm.
Right. Yes.
When I started dating the person I'm now married to, my wife, my best friend was like, you'll always know Matt is angry because he gets really quiet. Because I am now directing 99% of my energy trying to keep from losing my cool. I go inward, right? And there was, a couple of days later, like we were having a conversation about something and I got really quiet and she was like, oh, is this that? Is that the thing? Is this you really mad? I'm like, no, I'm fine. I twitch, right?
By the way, that would drive girls, like women, insane. Like if you said, no, I'm fine, we'd be like, no, you're not.
When Jake and I used to work at a school together for gifted kids, kids would say, "Oh, I'm fine, I'm fine." I'm like, you know what? For psychologists, fine is an acronym: freaked out, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. And they would stare at me like, "What?" Because like you're using that as like it's a shield you can hide behind. Like, I'm fine, like, but you're not. Trust me, if I'm asking you the question, "Are you okay?" I know you're not okay. So, don't deflect that. But yeah, my wife has helped me become a much more authentic communicator around my emotions because, the male perspective of this is like the only emotion I'm allowed to have is anger, but I don't like being angry. So I would rather not have emotions than let that anger sleep out. But it's like I'm allowed to cry, I'm allowed to be anxious, I'm allowed to worry. And, this is one of the things I lead authentically with my clients. I'm like, every time I do this, it gets easier. It's never going to be easy for me, but it gets easier every time I do it. I mean, I think it's what we want for all of our clients. Like our brains are fighting us in a lot of these ways, but our brains can grow in a positive direction as long as we lean into the work that goes into making it happen.
Yeah, it's sort of like exposure therapy, right? Like you expose yourself to the trigger, which is, just feeling angry and you sit through it. And I think learning acceptance strategies also like mindfulness would help with that and make it less painful.
Yeah, stupid exposure therapy.
Why?
I mean, life gives you no shortage of exposures, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
it's like, yes, what's the old line? Like, I know God wouldn't give me anything to do I couldn't handle, but I wish he didn't trust me so much. It's that sort of thing. I'm glad these conversations are being had now. I feel like I'm retroactively benefiting from it. And then we're taking those skills and we're giving them to the kids we work with now and creating a not only more mentally healthy generation, which thank goodness, but also a more emotionally aware generation. Because like the goal is to not have feelings. The goal is to understand your feelings and not let them sucker punch you. And I think that's a huge shift for the neurodivergent community who feels, I think, so swamped by their feelings all the time.
Yeah. And to add to that, understanding, but also if it's hard to understand, accepting that, like being, more flexible.
Flexibility, name of the game. Oh, so I'm going to keep reading all the awesome things you write, and I'm going to keep listening to you because you are one of my favorite people to listen to because you marry the research and the practical stuff so well. But what I'm going to do now is shift us into our final questions, if that's all right with you.
Nope, not allowed.
Ah, dang. Did you just hostile take over my podcast from me?
It's not ours anymore.
I'm the captain now.
Dang it. All right. Just from this point forward, right?
I'm the captain now.
God, I can feel my RSD being like, oh, you've done something wrong.
Oh my God, yesterday, like all day, I was feeling that. Let's not talk about it. Let's avoid.
Right. A good coping strategy. Not the healthiest, but a good one. I'm going to start with my wrap up question, which is if you could have any superhero in the world on speed dial, who would it be and why?
Oh, I don't know anything about superheroes. Okay, I guess I would say Spider-Man because he can get me out of places very quickly. Like, he would just like zoom in like on his web, and then just be like and like capture me and then I could just like go be by myself.
That is an unexpected and fantastic answer.
Yeah, it's not my fault I had to go. Spider-Man came and, with his web, he just dragged me away.
You webbed me, guys. I mean, I have no control over this.
Sorry, with that motion, I also imagined you just getting lassoed by him and pulled out of a window.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I was picturing too. Yeah. And the other cool thing about Spider-Man is it's like, it's artistic too. Like, I could partner and do something really cool with the webs, like what does anyone else have? Like Batman can't do that. That's the only other superhero I know. So that's as far as the conversation is going.
For a person who says they don't know a lot about superheroes, you know a lot about Spider-Man. So you are.
What, that he uses webs?
Lasso you out of a window.
Oh, okay. Wait. You want to have fun? Wait a second.
Audience, I know this isn't a visual podcast, so you can't see what's happening, but Jake and I have no idea what's happening.
Oh no. no. YouTube. Wait, I have a few options here of different superhero costumes. So for someone who knows nothing about superheroes, I am actually an undercover superhero.
You're Spider-Man.
Yeah. This is so amazing. I am like low-key speechless right now. Jake, ask your question because I have to get my brain to stop misfiring.
I just love that you managed to pull out a whole box of superhero masks and capes.
Yes,
A whole box.
it's necessary. Every therapist needs one. I have a lot of things in here. So, and I have different colors too. I'm kind of upset because one of the teams I had in therapy, I let them keep the superhero costumes in a group I was doing, and she took the pink one.
No more pink ones there.
What was she thinking?
Oh.
My question for you is, what's your favorite word and why?
My God, you guys are asking these open-ended questions to someone with ADHD, and now my brain is on fire. Oh my God, there's so many words.
Hey.
Okay, my favorite word. I can't even think right now. Light switch, because I'm looking at a light switch, and because it's two words in one, so you get more bang for your buck.
That's fair. Good reasoning. Absolutely.
Light switch is also a very satisfying word to say because it's not quite iambic pentameter if we're going to go back to Taming of the Shrew, but light switch, right? It's got that nice like sibilance in the back half of it. I approve. I approve of light switch.
Or butt, because like you never know if the person's talking about a butt or about like BUT, an exception.
I love how casually you just dropped that. Just, yeah, a butt.
But that's a good word too. It just leaves people in suspense, right? Like, is this person immature or is this person about to hit me with a plot twist?
I have a client I work with. He is a very high level science kid and he's in college. And he was sitting in there talking about all the cleavage in his lab group. And one of the young women was like very upset with him. And he's like, "Why are you upset?" And she's like, "Well, you're talking about my cleavage." She's like, "I'm not talking about your cleavage. I'm talking about the cellular cleavage." And I was like, "Dude, is that the word for it? Like the word is cleavage?" He's like, "Yeah." He's like, "I mean, I understand people use it in a different way." I'm like, "Oh, this is the most gifted kid conversation in the history of conversations." Like he just did not understand why this girl would think it was, to ape what you said, the other butt, right? Like we're in chemistry, we're talking about cleavage,
Matt, why are you talking about cleavage and butt?
right?
Um,
This is now a 13-year-old boy podcast. Poop butt. Nice. Oh my gosh.
I feel like I'm in the car with my kids. Yeah, no, what was I saying? That's actually what you said. That I was like, that actually makes so much sense. Because when you think about like cells, like when you think about, I don't know, looking through microscope in science class and seeing, like the cellular, it makes sense.
It really does.
All right, good. So now that we've lowered everyone's IQ by a few points, I think this might be a good place to leave off. Don't ask me another question. I don't want to hear it.
Yeah, I think that can be part of our advertising. Now that we've lowered your IQ by a few.
Exactly. I like it. It's completely contradictory to the title of the podcast, the name.
If there are any words that you would like to leave our audience with, and then we'll wrap up and try and put those IQ points back.
Okay, good. But I'm just kidding. Yeah, okay, so words to leave your audience with. Thank you so much for listening. I guess like if I were to sum up the conversation, I think if you listen to this episode and you feel like someone would benefit from listening to the first part of it, share it because I think the more we can increase awareness about the emotion dysregulation piece of ADHD, the more people will be detected and appropriately diagnosed earlier on. And, the more people will be able to help. It's all about education and awareness. And now with, social media and podcasts, it's just so much easier to spread the word in a way that's just easy to understand.
That's why we set this space up. And yes, please like, follow, subscribe, share, but more importantly, like just continue to seek out that information, right? And as I probably end up saying this at least once an episode, knowledge is not just power, knowledge is empowerment, right? And the more we inform people, the more they can have control of their own lives. And that's a very good thing. So for all of us here at Nerding Out at Neurodiversity, well, it's not our podcast anymore. So it's Dr. Kahn's podcast now. So she would say goodbye to you if she knew that this was when the outro was taking place. But you never know what you're going to get when you tune into an episode of Noon. That's for sure. We hope you had fun. We hope you learned something. For everybody here, I'm Dr. Matt Zakreski. Thank you so much for listening. Jake, do you want to say goodbye?
Thank you, everybody, for listening. And thank you, Dr. Kahn, for coming on. And especially for sharing your love of the word light switch and the multifaceted word of butt.
That's good. Yeah, I'm glad I enlightened everyone. I was thinking also just one more thing. Sorry. Life is like a box of Noon. You never know what you're going to get.
Stop it. If you keep us, you're actually going to be in charge of the podcast now because you're just better at it than we are. Oh, gosh. Jake, can we please record this one and play it at the holiday party? Because this is just the most fun I think we've ever had. You're a delight. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. I have tears in my eyes in the best possible way. Nerding Out on Neurodiversity is brought to you by Dr. Matt Zakreski and the team at the Neurodiversity Collective. To learn more about the Neurodiversity Collective or to be a guest on the podcast, please visit our website at www.theneurodiversitycollective.com/podcast. Audio and production by Jake Noonan. Show your support by subscribing, leaving a 5-star review, and telling your friends about us. Our Instagram and social media handles are at #NoonPodcast, NOON podcast. Your support is appreciated and keeps us going. All discussions presented on this podcast are strictly for informational purposes, awareness, and understanding. The advice presented is not and should not be considered to be therapeutic in nature. If you have any mental health questions, please contact your provider. All rights reserved.
You're listening to the Geekscape Network.